Hey guys, Ja-Mez here. As you know, it's April 1st, which means it's time to start VEDA, Vlog Every Day April, where people all over the world will do daily vlogs and try and keep up, and it's a challenge to release a different vlog every day. So I thought, I'd watched Errol and Amanda try this previous year, so I'm going to try it this year and see how far I get. We'll see. But rather than do the usual thing of talking about my life or different things that I see within my daily life, I thought I'd talk about something that is a little more interesting, I think. I'm going to talk about comics. Big surprise. But rather than just talk about comics, I'm going to review various issues that I think are kind of important, or I really like, or I really don't like. We'll see which ones I'm going to get to, but I wanted to start with one that was very important to me. Ultimate Spider-Man #1. If you've ever heard me talk about my history with comics, I was a huge comic fan when I was a kid, but when I became a teenager, I kind of fell out of love with comics, mostly because it wasn't cool to, like comics, and I was more interested in girls and being socially popular, which didn't really pan out. But eventually, towards the end of high school and the beginning of college, I actually started to get more interested in comics again. Around 2002, when the first Raimi Spider-Man film came out, the comics industry tried what they called Free Comic Book Day, which was an incentive to get people into comic shops to get free issues and get people interested who don't normally buy comics to look into comics and get them reading comics. And it worked for me because they actually introduced back then, they released on Free Comic Book Day a shortened version of Ultimate Spider-Man #1, and from the get-go I was hooked. I absolutely love Ultimate Spider-Man. It's still one of my, well, not today, but for the longest time it was absolutely one of my favorite books. Every week when I'd buy new books, it was the first book that I would read each month. If it was in my stack, it'd be the first one that I would pick up and read. And this is a very important issue because it not only got me back into comics, it got a lot of other people into comics. And it kind of revived not just the industry, but especially the Spider-Man franchise, which was on its last legs, and a lot of people weren't really reading it. And it got a lot of people back into reading it, which I think is really important to note. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this issue and this series specifically. So whether or not you know this, probably be pretty obvious since it's the first issue. This is a retelling of the origin of Spider-Man. Not a complete retelling of the origin, because the origin, interestingly, they took an 11-page origin from Amazing Fantasy 15 and turned it into a 6-issue story arc. This one covers the very beginnings of that story arc, the first part of that arc. And it tells the tale of a 15-year-old Peter Parker in a modern setting, updated to the world we live in now rather than when it was originally told in the 60s. Peter's a 15-year-old who's not really respected by his peers. He's kind of bullied and put down, and he's, your typical nerdy kid. He lives with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, who are kind of, they made them a bit younger and a little more interesting, rather than their old, doting selves. And during an eventful visit to Osborn Industries, Peter is bitten by an experimental spider who has been injected with the Oz formula. The Oz formula is something that comes back later in the series and is kind of a recurring theme and the cause of a lot of different events and different characters' changes. I won't get too far into that, but it becomes a very important aspect of not just this story, but a lot of other stories, and connects to a much bigger tale that encompasses the entire Ultimate Universe, and connects to a lot of other people, but I'm not going to go too far into that. So as I was saying, this is, Peter's origin. He's bitten by this spider and immediately begins to change. He becomes aware that these changes are going to have huge repercussions for his life, but at the same time, he goes from a quiet, nebbishy, nerdy kid to somebody very special. Someone who nobody really notices or cares about, and becomes, well, and while the transformation isn't immediate, the change in him is immediate, but his evolution into the character that we know and love takes a little while to pick up. So I really think that this is a very interesting series. I think that everybody should pick up and read this series. I really do. As I said, it's one of my absolute favorites, and it mixes not just the Spider-Man mythos and humor and retells things and puts its own little spin and twist on things. It's got a really good storyline, it's got really good writing, and it's got very good humor, which I think a lot of people kind of forget is a very central part of Spider-Man. And it's got a lot of heart. One of my favorite things about this series is the supporting cast, which I think is one of the aspects of Spider-Man they do really well. And one of the things that really drew me to the character to begin with was how Spider-Man is... Peter Parker's not just Spider-Man, he is Peter Parker as well, and he has different facets to his life, and the supporting cast became for a long time a very important part of his story, and the story that drew you in every week. You weren't just interested in what happened with, this week's villains or this week's ongoing plot that would connect into other issues. You were interested in what happened to Gwen and Mary Jane and Harry Osborn and various other characters as they were introduced over time. Flash Thompson, Liz Allen. Later they introduced all kinds of other characters. And this series does that really well. I think it's got a really good supporting cast, and especially later on when they start introducing other superheroes into Peter's life, and eventually when they end up finishing this part of the series and continuing on with a different Spider-Man, which I'll cover another time. It's a really emotional and moving story, and I think that it's something that people should pick up. It's not always the best storyline. There's often times when it does some weird, questionable things, and its take on certain characters is kind of bizarre, but I think it's a really fun series, and I really think you guys should find it. You're probably not going to find individual issues, but you can find trade paperbacks, collected versions of the story. I've got some of them over there. That's why I was looking over there. But I think you guys, if you're interested in Spider-Man or comics in general, this is a really good place to start. And it pulled me in. It pulled a lot of other people in. And it's a really good jumping on point. And it's really accessible to all ages. It's not a storyline that requires you to be of a mature audience, or... it doesn't alienate kids, but at the same time, it's not childish and immature. It's a good story. So I highly recommend it, and I suggest you guys go out and find it. Thanks, and that was my first vlog. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll probably be doing more soon. Bye, guys.